Here in Lagos, Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu has approved an increase in bus services for all routes operated by the Lagos Bus Services Limited, the LBSL. Average of 46% increase, according to the Lagos Metropolitan Area Transport Authority, takes effect on August the 1st. Governor Sanwo-Olu assented to the bus fare review following a passionate plea by the bus operating company on the need to sustain its operations following the negative effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on public bus transportation. Joining me now to discuss this is Mr. Fola Tinubu, Managing Director of Primero Transport Services that operates the BRTs. Good morning to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. My first question to you is with regards to the impact this 46% increase is going to have on Nigerians that use the services. The reactions from social media have not been positive. How do you react to that?
Good morning, and thanks for having me. Look, I said it earlier, there's never a good time for an increase. But we need to make sure that regulated bus services continues and exists in Lagos. We need to make there's a decision that needs to be made. Do we want a downfall economy or do we want a world-class service? If we want a world-class service, it needs to be paid for. It's a political question of who pays what. But the bus operator must cover their costs. And the old price, they were not covering their costs. And there's no way around it. You know, we have met with the governor, we showed the governor our books, and we explained to the governor, and the governor saw reason. Look, nobody is trying to victimize anybody here. Nobody's trying to gouge anybody. Nobody's trying to take advantage of anybody. The reality is, it is what, this is the reality that the bus operators must cover their cost. We are all trying to get private sectors to come into this arena and invest. The government cannot do it alone. So if you want private sectors to come in and invest heavily, then they must cover their costs. And what Lagos State just did is just to give the operators an opportunity to cover their costs.
Fantastic, very, very, market-determined answer that you've given there, which is understandable, and it actually spreads to other sectors of Nigeria's economy. When we look at the refineries, when we look at other aspects, but I do want to ask you this: since we're talking about covering costs. Considering that, and again, sorry, your point is very well taken. But considering that, most of, what is it now, about 60%, 50 to 60% of what Nigerians spend on their income goes to food. About the remaining 40%, 45 or so, goes to transportation. So transportation takes up a very large chunk of what Nigerians spend their money on. Now, considering the context of where we are, the effects of COVID-19, is it possible that perhaps this could have been delayed, or Lagos State could have covered those costs until perhaps a later date where it could now be pushed onto the everyday Nigerian that uses the buses? Because August the 1st is about a week away from now.
Well, first of all, like I said, there's never a good time for an increase. Because if this was done in December or November last year, people will still be complaining. So there's never a good time. That's number one. Number two is this. Lagos State government's revenue has dropped significantly. I read somewhere, look, I don't work for Lagos State, so, you may need to bring a Lagos State government official to defend Lagos State here. But I read in the newspaper that Lagos State IGR has dropped by almost about 40-something%. And also their statutory allocation has also dropped because of the falling oil prices. So it's not realistic to expect Lagos State to pick up the difference, because Lagos State has so many other issues that they are dealing with. I'm not an apologist for Lagos State, and you can get Lagos State government people to come and defend themselves. But the reality is this bus system must cover its cost. There's no way around it, because if it does not, eventually it will go away. That's why LMTS, LSTCC, and all these other bus services that we had in the 70s and early 80s went out of business because they were not covering their cost. I'll give you an example. In November last year, We bought 6 months worth of parts that we brought in to fix our buses. And we paid about just over 400 million naira for those parts. The same parts that we're trying to buy now, because naira has lost value, they are giving us a bill of over 500, almost 550, 560 million. But we have no choice. We have to buy them. The tires that we were buying before the pandemic at about 130, 140, they've jacked it up now to about 170, 180. So, unfortunately for us, we are buying things at commercial rates. And if we are buying our parts and everything at commercial rate, we have to find a way, at least, I'm not talking about profit here, I'm only talking about covering our costs.
Thank you so much, sir. Very honest, straightforward answer, giving us the numbers with regards to your cost. Now, you said you spent about 400 million bringing them in. By bringing them in, I assume you imported them, yes? What do you say to a move towards having more of these parts that you need domestically produced to reduce the costs of your parts?
Actually, that's the long-run solution. Unfortunately for us in Nigeria, we've allowed our manufacturing base to disappear. We don't produce anything at all in Nigeria. We are actually working right now, trying to start assembly of the buses in Lagos and also start manufacturing the parts in Lagos. But those are long-term plans and it takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. And we need to get the banks and investors to put up money for all of this. If the system does not break even, they would not give us the money, they would not invest. We need a massive amount of money to come into this sector as investment from both the banks and the capital markets. And the only way that would happen is by making sure we cover our costs. And also, it will provide employment, it will provide transfer of technology, and will pay, it will also increase the tax base for both Lagos State and federal government. So that's the way to go. But the basic tenet that this rests on is that the system itself must cover its cost.
Fantastic. Thank you for that answer. Okay, so the reason why I asked you that about the whole issue of domestic production, we've got an indigenous automaker here in the country, Innocent Motors. So what about partnering with that company to assist in reducing this cost by having them produce these items?
Like I said, we plan to start assembling buses here probably by last quarter of this year. Or first, in fact, if not for the pandemic, we were planning actually by third quarter, but because of this pandemic, we have to move it back. But we plan to start assembling the buses here in Lagos probably by last quarter of this year or first quarter of next year. So that will go a long way in alleviating some of these problems.
Okay, so it wouldn't have been, I guess, because of the costs, it wouldn't have been better to do that first, focus on getting the domestic production sorted out first, before having to raise prices. Now, I guess your answer to what I'm saying now would be that the immediacy of the cost difference you had to increase the cost now and then focus on getting the domestic side production later on. You couldn't have swapped that the other way around.
Definitely.
Okay, can I ask you, now I want to ask you about your competition, a decision that was made a while ago to ban motorcycles here in Lagos State. That of course would drive more demand over to buses, which would increase the amount of rides you have to take, which would increase the use of spare parts, wear and tear. Would you say that was in light of, and again, you're on the other side of the buses, so maybe I can expect what your answer would be. But if the motorcycles had been allowed to remain, then you would have more Nigerians using them and then less pressure on you. How do you see the decision to ban the motorcycles?
Look, we need to have an honest discussion in Lagos State. Do we want a downfall economy or do we want a world-class system? And whatever answer we give is what will drive, our political decisions. And I personally believe we cannot and we should not have an Okada or downfall mode of transportation because of all the problems associated with it. First of all, the safety issue, the costs and everything. So I think we should take the short-term pain and ensure we have a world-class bus service, like everywhere in the world. Lagos is too big to rely on Danfo and Okada. It's not going to work. In fact, about half of the traffic that happens in Lagos is because the Danfo driver stops everywhere and they don't obey the laws, they don't obey the rules and all that kind of stuff. So we need to have an honest discussion in this country. What kind of society do we want? What kind of transportation system do we want? Do we want to be like other countries, or do we want to keep on regressing? Because what we are trying to do now was happening in Lagos in the 70s and 80s. But we allowed it to die, and we are now trying to bring it back. So the question is that the way we want to go, or do we want to continue the way we were before, relying on Danfo and Okada?
Your point is well taken. So a very great discussion. We have to have you back here. Thank you so much for joining us on the Global Business Report. The Managing Director of Primero Transport Services, Mr. Fola Tinubu, on the increase in fares for buses and I guess the impact on the everyday Nigerian that has to move around.